The silence in the grand ballroom was not the peaceful kind. It was the silence of 1,000 unspoken judgments. Elena stood near the towering marble pillars, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. The candlelight from the chandeliers above danced over silk gowns and glittering jewels, but none of that warmth reached her. She had dressed with such careful hope that evening, choosing a gown of soft lavender silk that brought out the faint violet in her grey eyes. She had wanted to look beautiful for him. She always wanted to look beautiful for him. Her husband, Alexander Blackwood, the Duke of Ashworth, stood across the room, his broad shoulders turned away from her as if she did not exist. He was deep in conversation with Lord and Lady Pemberton, his expression cold and unreadable, the same expression he wore when he looked at her. The same expression he had worn for 2 years of marriage. Elena's throat tightened. She watched as Lady Pemberton placed a gloved hand on Alexander's arm and laughed at something he said. He did not pull away. He did not smile, but he did not pull away. Elena could not remember the last time he had allowed her to touch him without a flicker of discomfort crossing his face. She took a small step forward, thinking that perhaps she might join them, that perhaps tonight might be different. But before she could move, a voice hissed near her ear, just loud enough to be heard. Poor little Duchess, always hovering like a ghost. No wonder the Duke never looks at her. Elena froze. The words sank into her chest like shards of ice. She did not turn to see who had spoken. It did not matter. The truth of it was already bleeding inside her. She blinked rapidly, forcing her face to remain calm, but her heart was shattering. She looked at Alexander one more time, hopping against hope that he might glance her way, that some silent instinct might draw his attention to her pain. He did not look. He never looked. The drive back to Ashworth Hall was cloaked in a darkness heavier than the night outside the carriage windows. Alexander sat across from her, his gaze fixed on some distant point, his jaw set like stone. The wheels rumbled over the cobblestones, filling the silence that should have been filled with words. Elena wanted to speak. She wanted to ask him why. Why had he chosen her if he did not want her? Why did he leave her alone in every crowded room? Why did his eyes grow so distant whenever she entered a space? But her voice was a prisoner in her throat, held captive by the fear of his indifference. He had not always been this way. She remembered the early days of their courtship, when his letters had been warm and his rare smiles had felt like gifts. She had fallen in love with the man who wrote about the loneliness of his estate and the weight of his title. She had believed she could heal whatever hurt he carried. But the moment they exchanged vows, the door to his heart had closed and locked, and she was left standing in the cold hallway of his life. When they arrived home, he helped her down from the carriage with the same stiff formality he would offer a stranger. His gloved hand barely touched hers before he let go. "Good night, Elena," he said, his voice flat. She watched his tall figure disappear into the shadows of the great hall, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor until there was only silence again. Silence had become her closest companion. The days at Ashworth Hall moved with a slow, aching rhythm. The estate was vast and beautiful, with rolling green hills that stretched into mist and ancient oaks that whispered secrets in the wind. But inside the grand house, Elena felt as though she were living in a mausoleum. She woke each morning in her separate bedchamber, the sheets cold on Alexander's side because he never came to her. She took breakfast alone in the sunlit morning room, the silver tray heavy with food she could barely eat. She walked the gardens alone, her fingers brushing against roses that no one ever picked for her. The staff was polite but distant, mirroring their master's attitude. The housekeeper, Mrs. Crenshaw, ran the household with efficient precision and rarely met Elena's eyes. The maids curtsied and scurried away. There was no warmth, no companionship, no laughter. Elena tried in the beginning. She truly tried. She planned elaborate dinners that Alexander often missed, citing business in the village. She arranged fresh flowers in his study, only to find them wilted and untouched days later. She read the books he read, hopping to discuss them, but he would only nod and excuse himself. She poured her heart into invisible gestures, and he poured nothing back. One evening she gathered her courage and knocked on the door of his private study. He opened it with a look of mild surprise, as if he had forgotten she lived there too. He asked, "I wondered if we might take tea together tomorrow," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling inside her. "Just the two of us. I feel we hardly speak anymore." His grey eyes, so beautiful and so empty, regarded her for a long moment. "I have meetings with the tenant farmers tomorrow. Perhaps another time." He closed the door gently, but the click of the latch sounded like a thunderclap in her heart. She stood there, her hands still half raised, her hope crumbling into dust. That night she wept into her pillow, muffling the sound so no one would hear. The Duchess was not allowed to be broken. But something inside her did not die completely. Deep in her chest, a tiny ember still glowed. and she found a way to keep it alive. The old music room in the East Wing had been abandoned for years. Dust sheets covered the furniture, and the air smelled of forgotten time. But in the center of the room, like a sleeping beast, stood a grand pianoforte. Its wood was dark and polished, its ivory keys yellowed with age but still intact. Elena discovered it by accident on a rainy afternoon when she had been wandering the corridors, trying to escape the weight of her own thoughts. She pulled off the dust sheet and sat on the worn bench. Her fingers trembled as she touched the keys. She had been taught to play as a girl, before her family's fortunes had faded, and she had been married off to a duke who did not want her. Music had been her secret joy, the only language that understood her. And here, in this forgotten room, she could speak it again. She pressed a single note. The sound reverberated through the stillness, rich and mournful. Tears burned her eyes. She played a simple melody, something soft and aching, something that echoed the loneliness inside her. The music wrapped around her like a gentle embrace, the first embrace she had felt in years. From that day forward, the music room became her sanctuary. Every afternoon, when Alexander was occupied with estate matters or riding across the fields, she would slip away and play. She played until her fingers ached and her heart felt lighter. She played sonatas and nocturnes, pieces filled with longing and beauty. She poured every tear she had not shed, every word she could not speak, into the music. No one knew. The servants rarely ventured to that part of the house. The music remained her secret, her hidden flame, but secrets have a way of finding the light. The annual Ashworth Harvest celebration was a tradition stretching back centuries. The grounds of the estate opened to the village, with tents, tables of food, and music provided by local musicians. It was a day when the Duke and Duchess were expected to appear together, smiling and gracious, the image of noble unity. Elena dreaded it. She stood beside Alexander on the stone terrace, a painted smile on her face, as he addressed the crowd with stiff words of welcome. His voice was calm and authoritative, and the villagers applauded with respect. No one looked at her. She was a shadow beside him. Later, when the music began and the villagers danced on the grass, Alexander was pulled away by the local magistrate. Elena wandered toward the small stage where a string quartet was playing. She watched the musicians with a hunger she could not hide. Her fingers twitched at her sides, aching for keys that were not there. Then she heard it. "The Duchess is so dull," a woman whispered behind a tent flap. "Pretty enough, but no spirit." No wonder His Grace looks so miserable. Elena's vision blurred. The words struck her like a physical blow. She turned and walked quickly, blindly toward the house. She did not want to cry in front of everyone. She did not want to prove them right, but something in her snapped. Before she realized what she was doing, she was standing in front of the string quartet, her voice trembling but clear. "Might I borrow your pianoforte for a moment?" The musicians stared in surprise. The crowd nearby quieted, curiosity flickering in their eyes. Elena's heart pounded so hard she thought she might faint, but she sat down at the instrument. The keys felt cool and familiar under her fingers. This was her language. This was her voice. She began to play. It was not a simple tune. It was a piece she had composed herself in the lonely hours, a sonata born from sorrow and longing. The opening notes were soft, like a whispered confession. Then the music swelled, aching and passionate, a cry from the depths of a soul that had been silenced for too long. The crowd fell utterly still. The laughter and chatter died. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Elena's fingers flew over the keys, her body swaying with the emotion of the piece. She closed her eyes and let the music carry her away. She forgot the whispers, the cold bedchamber, the husband who never saw her. She was no longer the forgotten Duchess. She was a woman with a voice made of melody, and she was finally speaking. When the final note faded into the autumn air, there was a moment of perfect silence. Then the applause began. It was not polite clapping, it was thunderous, astonished, genuine. The villagers cheered. The musicians looked at her with awe. Elena opened her eyes, dazed and trembling. Across the lawn, Alexander stood frozen. His face was pale, his eyes wide with something she had never seen before. It was not indifference. It was shock, it was wonder. For the first time in their marriage, he was truly looking at her, but he said nothing. He did not approach her. He did not offer a single word of praise. He simply stood there, his jaw tight, before turning and walking back toward the house. The applause continued, but Elena felt a familiar coldness seep back into her heart. She had poured her soul onto that stage, and still he walked away. Something inside her shifted that night. As she sat alone in her bedchamber, watching the moon rise over the dark hills, she realized a painful truth. She had been waiting for his approval like a flower waiting for sunlight in a windowless room. She had shaped her entire existence around the hope that he might one day love her, and that hope had nearly destroyed her. She could not live that way anymore. The next morning, Elena did not seek Alexander out. She did not arrange fresh flowers in his study. She did not hover near his door, hopping for a scrap of his time. Instead, she put on a simple walking dress and went into the village. The village of Ashworth was a cluster of stone cottages and narrow lanes, filled with hard-working families and bright-faced children. Elena had visited before, but always as the Duke's shadow, distributing charity baskets with a stiff smile. Now she went alone. She found the small parish hall where the village children gathered for lessons. The vicar, a kind-eyed man named Mr. Thornton, greeted her with surprise. "Your Grace, what an honor," he said, bowing. Elena smiled, a genuine smile that felt strange on her lips. "I wondered if the children might like to learn music. I could teach them if you would allow it." Thornton blinked. Your Grace, I play a little," she said, her voice steady, "and I have far too much time." The lessons began the following week. Elena threw herself into them with a passion she had not felt in years. The children were eager and bright, their laughter filling the dusty hall. She taught them simple songs, their small fingers clumsy on the old pianoforte the parish had received as a donation. She saw wonder light up their faces, and in that wonder she found a purpose. The villagers began to notice. They saw their duchess sitting among the children, her silk gown replaced by practical wool, her hands patient and kind. Whispers began to change. No longer was she the pitiful, forgotten wife. She was the duchess with the gentle heart and the magical music. Elena grew stronger. She walked through the village with her head high, stopping to talk with shopkeepers and farmers. She learned their names, their struggles, their joys. She organized a small choir. She helped a young girl who had a gift for the violin find a proper teacher. She became a part of the community, not just a distant figure on a terrace. And in the quiet evenings, she returned to the music room and played for herself alone. She composed new pieces, filled with a different kind of longing now, a longing not for a man's love, but for her own wholeness. The music was no longer a cry of pain, it was a declaration of survival. It was at one of her village choir rehearsals that she met Lord William Harrow. He was a visiting gentleman, a younger son of an earl, who had come to the countryside to escape the noise of London. He had a passion for music that rivaled her own, and when he heard the sound of the choir drifting from the parish hall, he was drawn inside. William was tall and fair, with warm hazel eyes and a smile that came easily. He was charming without being false, kind without expecting anything in return. When he learned who Elena was, he did not look at her with pity or curiosity. He looked at her with genuine admiration. "Your Grace, that arrangement of the folk song was remarkable," he said after the rehearsal, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "The harmonies you chose brought tears to my eyes." Elena felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "You are too kind, my lord." "Not kind at all, just honest." He tilted his head, studying her with a gentle intensity. "You have a rare gift. The world deserves to hear it." No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not about her music, not about her. She thanked him and excused herself, but his words lingered in her mind like a beautiful melody she could not forget. Over the following weeks, William became a regular presence at her choir practices. He offered to accompany on the violin. He brought new sheet music from London. He listened when she spoke, truly listened, his gaze never drifting away. He laughed with the children and charmed the vicar. He was everything Alexander was not: warm, present, attentive, and he was dangerous, not because he ever behaved improperly. William was the picture of respect. He never touched her beyond a courteous handshake. He never spoke a word that could be misconstrued. But the danger lay in what he awakened in Elena's heart, the knowledge that she was worthy of being seen. Alexander, of course, noticed nothing at first. He was too consumed by his own cold world. But slowly, the changes in his household began to prick at his consciousness. He noticed that Elena no longer lingered near his study door. He noticed that the flowers in his room were gone, and no new ones appeared. He noticed that she smiled at breakfast, not at him, but at letters that arrived with a London seal. He noticed that she was gone from the house for hours, returning with a lightness in her step that had nothing to do with him. One afternoon, he found himself standing at the window of his study, watching her walk up the long drive with William by her side. They were laughing together, their heads bent close in conversation. The sight sent a strange, sharp sensation through Alexander's chest, a feeling he did not recognize at first. It was hot and uncomfortable. It burned. It was jealousy. He turned away from the window, his jaw clenched. Absurd. He had no reason to be jealous. Elena was his wife, bound to him by law and duty. She was not the kind of woman to stray. And yet, the image of her laughter, so freely given to another man, gnawed at him. He realized, with a jolt of shame, that he could not remember the last time she had laughed with him. He could not remember the last time he had tried to make her laugh. That evening he sought her out in the drawing room. She was seated at a small writing desk, a sheet of music paper before her, her quill moving in careful strokes. She looked up when he entered, and her expression was polite but guarded. "Alexander," she said, "is something the matter?" He stood near the fireplace, struggling to find words. "I saw you walking with Lord Harrow today." "Yes, he has been assisting with the village choir." Her voice was calm. "He is a fine musician and a good friend." The word should have reassured him. Instead, it strung. "I was not aware you had become so involved in the village." "Is much you are not aware of," Elena said quietly, and there was no malice in her tone, only a sad truth. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken things. Alexander wanted to demand that she explain herself, that she stop spending time with that man, but he had no right. He had given up that right through years of cold neglect, so he only nodded, stiff and proud, and left the room. His heart was a storm he did not know how to calm. The emotional tension in Ashworth Hall grew thicker with each passing day. Alexander began to watch Elena with a new, desperate intensity. He noticed the way she moved through the house, with quiet confidence now, no longer a shrinking shadow. He saw the respect in the servants' eyes when they addressed her. He heard the villagers speak of her with affection when he rode through the village, and he saw William. The man was everywhere Elena was, at the choir practices, at the small village concerts, even at the parish hall, helping repair the old pianoforte. William looked at Elena as though she were the sun itself, and what was worse, Elena looked back at him with a warmth that made Alexander's soul ache. He began to understand the magnitude of what he had lost. He had been given a treasure, a woman of grace and talent and deep, quiet love, and he had left her to wither in the dark. Now she was blooming, and he was not the one who had watered her. One rainy evening, he stood outside the music room door, drawn by the sound of her playing. The melody was different now than the one she had played at the harvest celebration. It was not sorrowful, it was strong and triumphant, filled with light. He listened with his forehead pressed against the cool wood, his eyes burning. He had done this. He had pushed her away so completely that she had built a world without him, and she was happy there. The confrontation came on a night of thunder and wind. Elena had just returned from a concert in the neighboring town, where her choir had performed to a packed hall. William had escorted her home, his carriage pulling up to the great doors as lightning split the sky. He had kissed her hand, a lingering, tender gesture before driving away. When Elena entered the hall, she found Alexander waiting. His cravat was loosened, his hair disheveled. He looked like a man on the edge of a precipice. "Where have you been?" His voice was rough. "At a concert," she said, setting down her music folio. "The children performed beautifully. With him." She met his gaze squarely. "Lord Harrow was there, yes. He supports the choir." "He supports you," Alexander bit out, his control fracturing. "Do you think I am blind? Do you think I do not see the way he looks at you?" Elena's heart pounded, but she did not flinch. "And how is it that he looks at me, Alexander? Tell me." He took a step closer, his gray eyes blazing. "As if you are everything." Words hung between them, raw and trembling. Elena whispered, her voice finally breaking. "He looks at me as if I am everything. And you have spent 2 years looking at me as if I am nothing, nothing at all." The tears came hot and fierce, spilling down her cheeks. She did not try to stop them. She was so tired of being strong in silence. "Do you know what it is like to love someone who will not even see you?" she cried, her voice echoing in the vast hall. "I tried, Alexander. I tried so hard. I left you flowers. I planned dinners. I waited for you every night, hoping you might come to me, might speak to me, might just look at me with something other than cold distance. And you never did. You left me alone in a house full of people. You let me drown in my own loneliness." Alexander's face had gone ashen. His hands trembled at his sides. "I am not a piece of furniture," Elena continued, her voice cracking. "I am not a portrait to hang on your wall. I'm a woman with a heart, and that heart was breaking every single day. And the only reason it did not shatter completely is because I found something of my own, my music, my purpose, and yes, a friend who sees me." She drew a ragged breath. "You do not get to be angry now. You do not get to be jealous. You surrendered that right the moment you chose to forget I was your wife." Her words fell like stones into still water, and the ripples spread through Alexander's soul. He stood paralyzed, the truth of her pain tearing through the walls he had built around his own heart. He had not been cruel out of malice. He had been cruel out of cowardice. His own parents had lived in a cold, silent marriage, and he had learned that love was a weakness, that emotion was a danger. When he had begun to feel genuine affection for Elena during their courtship, it had terrified him. So he had shut her out, convinced that distance would protect them both. Instead, it had destroyed her, and now he saw the tear-streaked face of the woman he had sworn to cherish. He saw the strength it had taken for her to survive. He saw the beauty of her spirit, a beauty he had ignored for far too long. "Elena," he choked, his voice a broken whisper, "I am so sorry. I am so deeply, profoundly sorry." She wrapped her arms around herself as if to hold her pieces together. Sorry is just a word. It does not undo the nights I spent weeping alone. I know, he took a shaky step toward her, then stopped, afraid to come too close. I know I cannot undo it, but I would give anything to try to make it right. I have been a fool, a blind, cowardly fool. I was afraid of my own feelings, and I made you pay the price. She looked at him, her grey eyes swimming with years of hurt and a tiny, fragile flicker of hope. What do you want from me, Alexander? I want to learn to be the husband you deserved from the beginning, he said, and there was no coldness in his voice now, only raw, desperate sincerity. I want to know your music. I want to know your heart. I want to earn back even a sliver of the love I threw away. The thunder rumbled outside, but inside the great hall a different kind of storm was quieting. Elena did not fall into his arms. She was not ready for that, but she did not turn away either. She simply looked at him for a long, aching moment, then nodded once. We shall see, she said softly. We shall see. The weeks that followed were not a fairy tale. Healing was slow and painful. Alexander kept his word, though. He began to show up for her. He attended her choir rehearsals, standing quietly at the back, his presence a silent promise. He brought her tea in the music room and sat listening while she played, not speaking, just being there. He started to ask her questions about her day, her thoughts, her dreams. Elena did not trust it easily. She had been wounded too deeply. But she watched him struggle to change, watched him fumble with words and gestures that did not come naturally to him, and something in her began to soften. William noticed the change immediately. He was perceptive and kind, and he understood what was happening. One afternoon, he found Elena alone in the parish hall. Your Duke is trying very hard, William said, his smile gentle and a little sad. I have never seen a man more desperate to be better. Is it enough? Elena asked, her voice uncertain. William took her hand and pressed it lightly. That is for you to decide, but I think you already know the answer in your heart. You have always loved him, even when he did not deserve it. She knew he was right. William had been a dear friend, a mirror that showed her her own worth, but her heart had never truly left the cold, lonely man who was now kneeling at her feet, figuratively, begging for redemption. The public success came in the form of a grand musical evening at the estate of the Marquis of Thornwood. Elena's choir had been invited to perform, and she had composed a new piece for the occasion. The hall was filled with the cream of society, the very same people who had once whispered about the pitiful Duchess. This time, when Elena walked onto the stage, she did so with her head held high. She wore a gown of deep blue silk, and her eyes were clear and steady. She sat at the pianoforte, and the room fell silent, not with judgment, but with anticipation. She played. The music that flowed from her fingers was the story of her journey. It began with sorrow, a haunting melody that spoke of loneliness and aching nights. Then it shifted, growing stronger, more defiant, a declaration of survival. And finally, it bloomed into a theme of hope and forgiveness, a love that had been broken and was slowly, carefully being rebuilt. When the last notes faded, the audience rose to their feet. The applause was a tidal wave, washing over her with warmth and validation. Elena stood and curtsied, tears streaming down her face. She was no longer the shadow, she was the light. And in the front row, Alexander stood with tears in his own eyes, clapping until his hands ached. He was not hidden in the back. He was right there in front of everyone, and his gaze held no coldness at all. It held love. It held awe. It held the desperate hope of a man who had finally woken up. After the concert, he found her in the garden of Thornwood Hall. The moon was high and the night was still. She was standing by a fountain, her silhouette silver in the darkness. He approached her slowly, his heart pounding. Elena, she turned. I have no right to ask anything of you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But I must say this. You are the most extraordinary woman I have ever known. I was a blind fool. I let my own fears turn me into a monster of ice. But watching you tonight, watching you shine so brightly, I realized that I love you. I have loved you from the beginning, and I was too much of a coward to admit it. I love your kindness, your strength, your talent. I love the way you laugh with children. I love the way your fingers move over piano keys. I love you, Elena. I am sorry it took me so long to say it. He fell to his knees, the Duke of Ashworth kneeling in the damp grass, all pride stripped away. If you can find it in your heart to forgive me, I will spend the rest of my life making you feel seen. I will never be cold again. I will never take you for granted. Please, please, give me a chance to love you the way you deserve to be loved. Elena looked down at him, and the last of her protective walls crumbled. She had dreamed of this moment 1,000 times, but the reality was more powerful than any dream. This was not just an apology. This was a man laying his soul bare, broken and beautiful. She reached down and touched his face, her fingers tracing the tears on his cheeks. Alexander, she whispered, I have loved you through the darkest silence. I never stopped loving you. I just stopped believing you could love me back. Caught her hand and pressed his lips to her palm. I do, I do. With everything that I am. She pulled him to his feet, and they stood there in the moonlight, two people who had traveled through a long winter and finally found spring. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch no longer cold but trembling with reverence. May I kiss you? He asked, his voice barely audible. She breathed. The kiss was soft and salty with tears, a kiss of reunion and renewal. It held all the words they had never spoken, all the pain and the hope and the fragile, fierce love that had survived against all odds. They returned to Ashworth Hall together, not as a distant duke and a ghostly duchess, but as a man and a woman who had found their way back to each other. The house no longer felt like a mausoleum. Music floated through its halls, laughter echoed in its rooms, and in the bedchamber that had been so cold, two people slept wrapped in each other's arms, hearts beating in quiet, contented rhythm. In the years that followed, Elena continued to teach music to the village children, and Alexander became her most devoted supporter, often sitting in on lessons and learning to play a few simple chords himself. They held concerts in the great hall, filling it with warmth and community. Lord William Harrow visited often, always a cherished friend, and he eventually found his own love story with a spirited violinist from Vienna. But the greatest love story belonged to Elena and Alexander, a story written not in grand gestures, but in daily choices to see each other, to listen, to cherish. The silence that had once defined their marriage was replaced by music, by words, by the sweet, enduring melody of a love that had been lost and found again. And every night before they slept, Alexander would take Elena's hand and kiss it, whispering the words that had become their sacred vow. I see you, I love you, I am here. She would smile, her heart full and healed, and whisper back, I know.